Oh hey internet! So recently I uploaded a breakdown video using all the visual effects in my short film The Omen Chronicles, and I've been reading all the comments online, and out of all the effects that people seemed most interested in learning how to do, it wasn't the smoke or the sparks and all the flashy stuff like that, it was actually how I painted people out of the scene. Fortunately, this is an effect that you can do 100% in After Effects with zero third-party plugins or software. So I decided to go ahead and make this tutorial on how to do that, and if you're interested in following along, you can actually go ahead and download the original footage I used to make this exact effect and tutorial. So the download link for that is in the description for you to follow along if you want. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Okay, so as you can see, we have a very blank, typical After Effects project file here, and I've already imported the footage, so I'm going to drop this into a new composition, and I'm going to shave off the first and last couple seconds, because, you know, always fumbling around, hitting the record button, everything gets all shaky, so I'm just going to trim it to here. This is the work area, and if you right-click on that, you can trim comp to the work area. So now, I'm going to drop the warp stabilizer effect on it, and right away I'm just going to go to detail analysis and enhanced reduction. And let's set this down to like 5. And so what I did was I shot this whole thing on my Canon T3i, very standard, you know, run-of-the-mill footage, nothing too fantastic about it. I mean, I didn't shoot this on a RED or anything, and I shot it on a tripod while holding the tripod, using it as like a sort of counterweight stabilizer sort of thing. And you don't want to have any sort of twisting back and forth. That type of shaking is the worst because it gives you the most rolling shutter artifacts. And what I mean by that is, you know, that weird jello-y effect that you see with really shaky footage. And that's just really hard to correct for. It is doable, but it's just way easier and way faster to just not have it at all. So as you can see, this actually looks pretty steady. Yeah, not too bad. I'm actually going to jump it up to 10% though. See, normally I never go above 20%. I mean, if there's a lot of motion and I just really want it stable, I'll go upwards of like 30 to 40, but I typically never go beyond that. Even if you have really shaky footage, just like 1 or 2% is great. So now that we have it stabilized, it looks great. I'm going to pre-compose this. So by going up to layer and then pre-compose and move all attributes. That's always important because you want to be able to bring the effects that are applied to that into that layer. Cool. So now that we have that included, I'm going to go ahead and track the camera. And it's just going to analyze in the background. This you could do detailed analysis if you need to. So once this gets tracked out, we're going to basically create a solid that is going to go on this wall and another solid that's going to go on the ground here. And we're going to use that as the basis of our projection map. And so once we get this solved, I'll create the solids and the camera. Select that, get all these tracker marks. Check that out. Pretty cool. And you might also notice you'll get like these roaming ones here. You can select them and delete them if you want, but honestly, this is a good enough track that it's not really that big of a deal. So let's go to the end here, about right here. So select some of these points around where she was standing, and sweet, it actually looks pretty solid. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click, create solid and camera. Interesting, it looks a little off. We want this line to kind of match up with this vertical line here. So first things first, I'm going to make the layer a white layer. So if I go to solid settings and make this white, keep dragging everything into my recording window, should be good. Cool. And now I'm going to apply the grid effect. And this will just kind of let us see how it matches up into the scene. So it tracks great. Now we just got to get the orientation right. So first, let's go ahead and move this little orientation thing down to the bottom here. And by doing that, we're going to hit A to bring up the anchor point. And this is basically just, you know, the center point of where all your scale and rotation and stuff is based off of. So we want to set our Y position here to 0, and or, you know, 1080, opposite of that. Let's go ahead and set it to 0, and we'll flip it around because I find it much easier to keep track down the road. So if you hit W or the rotation key here, you can make sure you get the red here. Oh, not that one. That's the Z. There we go. So you can flip it as much as you like, but if you hold down the shift button while doing that, it'll actually pop into 45-degree increments. So let's make it all the way vertical here and let go. And let's just kind of get it lined up. Drag it down to the bottom here. That actually lines up pretty well. So let's drag this out, and you'll see our first hiccup here. It doesn't line up. We want this line to, measure up with that. So hit W again. We can rotate it into place, maybe. Meh, that's good enough. That's actually not too bad. So now we can label this wall. And I'm going to duplicate this layer by hitting Control D, or you can go up to Edit and then Duplicate. But that one's a pretty common shortcut to use. So let's rename this one, the top one, Sidewalk. Because why not? And we're going to rotate this exactly 90 degrees. And the easiest way to do that is just to have your rotation tool out and rotate it. Remember, hold down Shift, 45-degree increments, and bam, exactly 90 degrees. We're already most of the way there. Hey, check it out. Sweet. All right, so now we can go ahead and delete these grid effects. They are no longer any use to us. Delete that. And you'll notice that we have just, this white blob on our screen. You also might notice we have the seam going on here. To get rid of that, just select one of your layers and just kind of nudge it down. You never want to just like grab the layer itself and move it. That is just a recipe for disaster because some of your position settings will be different. All right, so our next thing we want to do is let's go ahead and turn those off. We want to create our projection plate, which is essentially just a film slide in a projector from, the old days. So here's a good clean slate right here. Dang it. And we're going to duplicate our footage and freeze frame it in that specific spot. So go to Time, Freeze Frame, and yeah, it doesn't work. That's okay, just delete it. Not a big deal. Also, before you move your playhead, click out and then hit the star button above your 9 key on the number pad. That'll leave a marker on your whole comp so you know exactly when it actually stopped, because you might, close out of that and you won't know where it is. So remember, holding down Shift pops to that. All right, so here we want to do a couple things first. Let's click our camera here and hit P to bring up our position, and here are all our position keyframes from our camera track, and we're going to create a light. So go to Layer, New, Light. And all these settings don't really matter as long as it's casting shadows, and hit OK. So now we want to copy the position of our camera at this very moment to our light. And you can do that in a number of ways. One, you can just copy the position and paste it here, but then you have this weird issue with all your keyframes. I have a much better solution. What we're going to do is we're going to parent it to the camera, but not just parent it. You're going to hold down the Shift key and then parent it. So I'm holding down the Shift key, letting go, and now I'm going to undo that by just selecting None, and what that did was it moved it into position. It moved it to the same position, and then I basically undid it. So now we have this. So for our footage, we want to make this a 3D layer as well. So let's go ahead and make 3D and hit our position key, and let's copy the position from our light to our footage. Bam. So now we still don't really see anything. It's like, what happened to it? Oh, it's this massive black object here? Okay, cool. So go to your position here, and then we're going to see the top view. So where it says active camera, go down to top. And if we activate these again, you'll see this is our top view of our composition here. You can see the little camera flying back and forth as I go through the camera move. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our footage here, and we're going to move it forward from the light just a little bit. Exact same principle as a projector, literally. And if you hit S on the keyboard to bring up your scale, you can bring it down until it's just big enough to see. And any scale numbers between 1 and 8 is perfectly normal. That's okay. So now that we've done that, let's go back to our active camera, and you'll see we have a little floating slide just hanging out. That's good and all, but it's not what we want yet. So we have our slide here, and I'm going to kind of just rotate it so it's flat, and I'm going to scale it down. Again, holding Shift makes it so that it scales evenly, and just kind of roughly get it into place. It doesn't have to be perfect, because what we're going to do next will solve this issue. It's actually my favorite part because it's interesting, and it held me back for the longest time until I figured it out. So corner pin, that's what we're using. Drop that onto the footage, and now we can actually go through and let's set our resolution to full. Just move each corner until it is actually in their respective corners. And don't worry, it'll all line up once all 4 corners are actually in place. It might not seem totally like it right now, but that's all right. And even if you're off by a couple pixels, it's really not that big of a deal. Bam. Sweet. So without corner pin. And now it should line up perfectly for the most part, you know. So now we want to edit our 3D layer settings. And to do that, I use the shortcut AA. So you just hit A on the keyboard twice really fast with your selected footage. And for this, we want to cast shadows only. And that'll make the layer disappear from the actual view. See, if we set it back to off, it just is the normal frame again. And if we set it to on, we get the results, but we still have the frame. So if we set it to only, the frame actually goes away. And the next thing we want to do is set our light transmission to 100%. And that's what actually turns it into the, you know, the actual film slide sort of thing. So we can project the light from our little light here through our frame and onto these white solids that take it. But we got to change those settings as well. So let's minimize that. Select our two solids here and hit AA to bring up their settings. And the only thing we need to do here is set accept lights to off. Bam. Look at that. And just like that, we have a projection map. And obviously we have all this extra white stuff. And what we're going to do is we're just going to select everything and minimize it first. We're going to mask out basically the area around her. And so if we set our two solids here to 50% opacity, I hit T on the keyboard to bring up opacity, by the way. Just kind of go where she jumps, and about right there. Cool. So we could actually extend this. Nope, didn't want to do that. Select your solid, stretch it outwards sideways a little bit more if you want. And if you hit G or the pen tool, you'll bring up the pen tool. And we're just going to mask around her. Cool. We're going to do the same thing with the sidewalk. And here I kind of want to get all of the shadow as well, so I'm actually going to extend this so we can cover the shadow. There we go. And again, with the pen tool. So cut around. Cool. And that's it. So if we select both of our layers here and hit F, we can bring up the feather. Let's set them both to about 100. And if we hit T again, let's bring their opacity back up to 100%. Cool. And there you have it. Projection map. She is no longer in the scene. Oh, but she starts to appear there and just walks right out. So that's the gist of projection mapping itself as an effect. So let's go ahead and do a couple more things. We're going to pre-compose everything except for the camera. We're going to pre-compose that too, but we're going to duplicate it first because we don't want to get rid of it. So select your footage, camera, wall, sidewalk, and your light. And go up to layer and pre-compose. We're going to call this our projection map. Sweet. So now, if you check it out, just like that, it's actually not too bad. Lines up pretty well. In my experience, it rarely lines up very well. So now we're going to, animate her back into the scene. And we can do that one of two ways. One, we can just literally fade out as she jumps. So if we set this to off, we can set our opacity to animate from 100% to 0%. And we can set both of them and hit F9 on the keyboard to ease those things and turn it back on. So now as she jumps, she kind of fades in. Let's brand preview this. Sweet. So as you can see, it's all there, and then she pops out of nowhere. You can't do this with traditional 2D tracking. I mean, you can kind of get away with 2D tracking the wall and the ground separately, but you still get parallax between, the edge of the street and the wall here. Not so much parallax with the wall itself, but you'll still get a little bit of lining up issues that you would have to correct with, something like the corner pin tool, and that's really just a pain. So this is a much more efficient, much more interesting way of, painting someone out because it's in motion. Okay, so one extra thing I'm going to do for this tutorial is show you how to do a difference match. So let's go ahead and duplicate both of these layers, Control D, move them up to the top. Let's turn off the animation of the opacity on this top one. And we'll just pre-compose both those top layers as clean plate footage. Cool, so now if we duplicate our footage itself and move this up here, we can call this girl raw footage. Blah. So we're going to hit F4 on the keyboard to bring up our transfer modes, and we're going to select this top one and set that to a difference transfer mode. And as you can see, any pixels that are different has some math thrown at. I don't actually know specifically what happens to the pixels, but any pixels that are the same to the layer underneath are just canceled out. They turn black. So that allows us to create a luma matte. So if we pre-compose both these layers again, actually let's delete the camera tracker because that's just unnecessary. Let's see if we need the top one. No. Okay. And select both of them, Control-Shift-C to pre-compose, and we're going to call this difference matte. And now we're going to select Colorama, or Colorama, whatever you want to call it. And I know, right away it looks like you're looking at like a thermal image or something like that. Not that big of a deal. If you go down to Output Cycle, and then Presets, you can go down to Ramp Gray. And that'll just make it a black and white image. And if you hit right here in the wheel and select white, you can actually create this new pin and drag it all the way around and just kind of boost the color settings, or the luminosity settings, I should say. But now we're starting to get some of this noise here, and we don't want that either. So if we hit again and select black, kind of just eliminate that a little bit. And I know this is rough. Honestly, I wouldn't accept this for my own projects. This is not nearly up to par for the quality I would be interested in getting. But if you're just, doing something rough and quick, or perhaps throwing a bunch of smoke on top of it, actually isn't too bad. So if we go to Fast Blur, let's kind of get rid of some of those harsh edges. Meh, that's good enough. Maybe let's boost it a little bit. Levels. Bam, look at that. And just like that, we have a luma matte. And all this ground stuff we're not going to want either, but that's okay. So if we duplicate our footage one more time and bring it up here, let's call this girl footage again. And go to the track matte and set to luma matte. And if we solo this, you'll see that she's actually soloed from the scene. It's a quick and dirty way to rotoscope someone when you don't really want to actually rotoscope. So let's pre-compose both those layers again. Control-Shift-C. I know we're doing a lot of pre-composing, but that's okay. And we'll call this girl. So now we can actually move her around and stuff. If we actually move this so that it fades out a little later. Let's see, maybe right there. And so now if we hit P to bring up our position, we can animate this. So from right here, just as she's starting to land, let's set a keyframe, and then move back a few frames, maybe at the peak of her jump, like about right here. And we're just going to move her up. And we're going to turn on motion blur here in a moment, and I would select your second keyframe and hit Easy Ease, so that should kind of moves in. But obviously we don't want any of this stuff right here, so here we will actually use a mask. So let's mask this out. MM on the keyboard. Maybe have to hit it 3 times, I don't know. We're going to set it to subtract. Maybe feather at 15, just in case you get a hard edge. And we'll also animate the path for this thing. Let's set it to none for the time being, so we kind of know where it's going to be. So right when she lands, if we hit U on the keyboard to bring up all of our keyframes, right here, we're going to set a keyframe on the mask opacity. Right there, move that up 1 frame, and then hit 0. So now we can go back to subtract. We don't have that nasty little, I guess we do have a little bit of it. Oh well. Oh, dang. Okay, so we got to add one more mask. Let's select our footage and add that last mask. And it's important right here that you put this above the subtraction mask because you have to add and then subtract. So now, when the opacity of the mask disappears, she does not as well. Cool. So now you kind of get this dropping out of the sky effect, which I think is fairly convincing, considering it's so crude. If you hit F4, we can turn on our motion blur for both the layer and the comp, and that got rid of that little thing we saw. So let's RAM preview this. All right, so here is our final effect. And you'll notice that there's a bit of a thing here, and that's because of the thing we didn't take care of around the shadow of her foot, and that's just kind of popping with the motion blur. That's very easy to fix, so I won't do that here. There's a couple more things we can do to make this really solid. And the last thing is we can hit Control-Alt-Y to create an adjustment layer, or you can just go layer, new adjustment layer. And we're going to type in pixel motion blur. And what that'll do is it will literally analyze each and every frame and the vectors of each pixel and add motion blur on top of that. Update my samples. So if you turn this off, you can see the difference it makes. This is usually really good if you have a high shutter speed at which I shot this whole video at, because I knew I was going to stabilize it, so I didn't want to have any of that motion blur artifacting baked into the shot, which looks really weird when the camera gets stable. What I prefer, which is real smart motion blur, which is a lot faster in my opinion. It's honestly, it's worth the money. I've had this thing for a couple years now. It's great. But if you don't have it, not a big deal, because pixel motion blur does the same thing. It's just like 4 times slower. Just keep that in mind. It's the kind of thing you throw on like just before you render out your final shot. And oh yeah, one quick thing I forgot to mention. If your texture for whatever reason looks kind of blurry and you just can't quite seem to blend it in because it is too blurry, what the issue is that your shadow map size isn't large enough. And to fix that, go up to composition and composition settings. And you'll bring up, your typical composition settings dialog box here. But if you go to advanced and then go to options, you can set this to whatever you want. By default, it's at comp size. And when you're working with just 1080p footage, usually comp size is plenty. But for instance, on Omen Chronicles, I was working with 5K red files, and so I had to bump that up to like 4,000 to get it to look clean. So if you have that issue, try that. It might help. If not, I guess, sorry. I tried. Well, I hope you learned a thing or two with this whole tutorial. I was pretty excited about this because there aren't that many tutorials online talking about projection mapping in a real use sort of scenario. It allows you to paint someone out with the moving camera. I'm sure all of you guys can see the appeal in that. And so yeah, I will see you guys later. And action.